In the 21st century, the People's Republic of China demonstrated to the world that authoritarian nations can build their economies, albeit through diverse means. This is especially significant for the African continent, where just 9 of 54 countries have democratic governments. China's security commitment to Africa can be traced back to 3 major policy frameworks: its National Defense Strategy, the Triennial Forum on China-Africa Cooperation, FOCAC, summits held since 2000, and China's formal Africa policy since 2006. China is still categorized as a developing nation by the United Nations. However, China's position on the UN Security Council gives it significant clout in pursuing its goals, and Africa now plays a significant role in China's foreign policy. The effects of China's growth on the world stage are still a matter of contention. Others view China as a free rider in the world economic system, while others view China as a balancer in a global order dominated by the West. States in Asia, Africa, and Latin America continue to solicit substantial loans from the Chinese bank. In nations with a high level of political instability, substantial investments are made to create the appearance of an improving economy. Since the beginning of the 21st century, the majority of African states have become increasingly interested in aligning themselves with China, to the exclusion of the United States. Recently, Russia has also become more eager to wield its power, particularly in conflict zones, where the Kremlin aims to gain leverage if it aids struggling governments. Conflict zones in Africa also provide China and Russia with an opportunity to test their forces and hardware. China is the only power now dominating Africa. Economic perspectives. African nations feel that there are 3 benefits to cooperating with China. China is interested in both African resources and products from a commercial standpoint. Exports of gold, oil, iron ore, and minerals generate substantial money for African nations. Secondly, the Chinese government established numerous manufacturing enterprises in Africa due to the availability of inexpensive labor. For nations with unemployment rates of 30 or even 50%, such as the Democratic Republic of the Congo and Angola, Chinese-created jobs are important. Additionally, the Chinese Import-Export Bank makes loans with low or no interest. These loans represent a one-of-a-kind opportunity for struggling African economies, as no other bank would risk making a credit that may never be repaid. At first look, infrastructure projects supported by China, such as the $3.2 billion railway in Kenya, the $526 million dam in Guinea, and the $475 million light rail system in Ethiopia, enhance the economies of Africa. China's interest is not in receiving the money back, but rather in investing in mining and agricultural projects that can bolster its economy. The soft power of China in Africa. To maximize its soft power, China has assumed the role of international crisis mediator. This new post assists the CCP in maintaining its image as a responsible global power. Xi Jinping, who emphasized China's objective of becoming a global superpower by 2049, wants his country to be viewed as a pacifying force on the international scene in order to counteract Trump administration initiatives. In addition, mediation and economic assistance can provide China with a long-term potential to influence the fate of governments in nations ruled by a hybrid or totalitarian regime. Thus, the CCP is able to maintain a balance between the democratic sphere of influence and governments closer to China's ideology. Political factors. China's professed non-interference in the affairs of other nations is another attractive aspect of the alliance. The majority of African countries are governed by hybrid, a combination of democracy and authoritarianism, or totalitarian regimes, which forces the United States or the United Nations to impose numerous conditions before providing help. Chinese politics also influence the economic collaboration between the CCP and African governments, albeit less visibly. An African nation that recognizes Taiwan as a state will receive, on average, 2.7 fewer Chinese infrastructure projects per year, whereas an African nation that votes with China in the United Nations General Assembly will receive 1.8 more infrastructure. There are further institutions that offer low-interest loans, such as the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. China, on the other hand, is the only nation that does not need respect for human rights or democratic elections. Regional conflicts. Despite the African Union's efforts to improve communication between its members, insufficient interstate collaboration continues to pose a threat to Africa's security. Future ethnopolitical, religious, and territorial conflicts are anticipated to increase international tensions. China has only twice in its history contributed combat soldiers to a United Nations peacekeeping mission. The People's Liberation Army, PLA, of China has utilized its participation in MINUSMA to train its forces to operate in a difficult environment, gain experience collaborating with other UN contingents, and test new military equipment. In recent years, China's military and security links with Africa have drawn criticism from the international community. Human rights advocacy organizations and Western governments have called attention to the arms sales to certain African nations, such as the Democratic Republic of the Congo, DRC, Sudan, and Zimbabwe. China said that it conforms with international norms and does not transfer military equipment to countries where the UN Security Council has imposed an embargo. Nonetheless, according to the statistics, armament deals were negotiated with states like South Sudan and Cameroon, where interethnic strife led to coups and mass executions. For instance, during the Sudanese Civil War in 2013, South Sudanese insurgent leaders bought 1,200 Red Arrow 73 anti-tank missiles, which the Chinese government delivered in 2014 while the fighting was still ongoing. Military partnership. In the late 1990s, the frequency of high-level military exchanges between China and Africa increased, remained stable until 2009, and then began to increase again in 2010. China has greater military links with Algeria, Angola, Egypt, Ghana, Nigeria, South Africa, Sudan, Uganda, Zambia, and Zimbabwe, despite diplomatic relations with all African states. China trains African military personnel, conducts cooperative military exercises, and engages in humanitarian work, including search and rescue missions. African military personnel may travel to China for training, or Chinese instructors may provide training in African nations. The political military interaction between China and Ethiopia is one example. The Ethiopian army, reorganized following the Eritrea crisis of 2000 and staffed with 130,000 well-equipped soldiers, is regarded as one of the most experienced and effective military forces in Africa. China now provides the Ethiopian military with artillery, light armored vehicles, and troop transport vehicles. An unspecified number of Ethiopian officers are taught annually. Ethiopia is one of the 14 African nations where the Chinese embassy has maintained a military attaché since 2007. Morocco, Egypt, Nigeria, Sudan, South Sudan, Algeria, Cameroon, Tanzania, South Africa, and Ethiopia purchased large quantities of military equipment between 2012 and 2017, including Red Arrow 73 anti-tank missiles, Karakoram 8 combat planes, ASN-206 drones, ground air missiles, SAM, anti-ship missiles, ASCM, etc.